Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcin Lała. I represent the investor relations team of Tauron Polska Energia. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting earnings conference for analysts and investors on the Tauron Group's full year 2016 financial results. I'd like to welcome you here in the room and persons following our broadcast over the web, also via the conference call. As usual, the presentation will be conducted in Polish and simultaneously interpreted into English. Today's meeting will be conducted by Mr. Filip Grzegorczyk, the CEO, and Mr. Marek Wadowski, the CFO of the company. During the Q&A session, we'll also have Mr. Roland Makieła available, Executive Director for Controlling Affairs in Tauron, Dariusz Niemiec, the Commercial Director of the Trading Director responsible for trading. So in this group, we will be able to answer all your questions. Mr. President, please start the presentation. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are very happy to have you here today. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we would like to start by saying that we have a full year of work behind us. It was intense work, taking into account the regulatory and the business environment. This is a year that generally, from the point of view of Tauron Group, we can consider as to have been a successful year. The financial results that Tauron Group generated in 2016, it seems that the earnings confirm the group's strong position on the Polish utilities market, power market. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the specifics. The group generated stable sales revenue of 17.6 billion PLN. EBITDA for 2016 is more than 3.3 billion PLN. It's worth noting that in 2016, we posted the net profit of 367 million PLN. The amount of this net profit was first of all affected by the write-downs of conventional and renewable generation assets. Impairment charges, 3.8 billion PLN was spent on capex. That's 9% less than in 2015. Of course, the capex decline is the result mainly of shifting of the works on the project of construction of the 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno. Net debt to EBITDA ratio year over year went up 0.11, but if you compare this leverage ratio versus the December 31st, 2016 versus September 30th, 2016, we have observed a decline from 2.6 down to 2.3. This was possible thanks to the well-planned and steadfast operations activities of the management board, with the climax of activities coming when we issued in Q4 2016 the hybrid bonds worth 190 million euro. Undoubtedly, the issue of those hybrid bonds gave Tauron Group, or still gives Tauron Group, more comfort in terms of financing and leverage. Also, it extends the debt maturity deadlines, and the CFO, Mr. Wadowski, will describe the details during his part of the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, with respect to the operating data, first of all, one needs to indicate, especially point out the mining segment, as here we posted historically the highest year-over-year increase of extraction output. This was an increase of 1/3, 30% or so. In the generation, we generated more volume and a stable heat generation output. This is the result of a strategy, commercial trading strategy for 2016 in the environment of low market prices. It's worth noting that if you look at the full year, the distribution volume went up which we understand as to be the consequence of GDP growth. As you know very well, the distribution generates more than 70% of the total EBITDA of our group. Therefore, the increasing volumes in distribution have a direct implication on the financial result. With respect to the supply, retail electricity supply, it went down by 11%. This decline is, of course, the result of competition on the electricity supply market, which in case of market resulted in the loss of some customers. But on the other hand, it's worth emphasizing these were customers that generated very low margins from A and B groups. So this loss of customers is not so painful for the company. Nevertheless, in 2017, our goal is to increase the electricity supply volume, and we want to achieve that by expanding the product offering and expanding the offering of additional extra services. In terms of financial and operational results for Q4 2016, then in Q4 2016, EBITDA was 879 million. It was 29% higher versus the same period of a previous year. Net profit in Q4 was 93 million PLN. I'd like to very strongly emphasize that in Q4 we achieved a 48% increase of hard coal output, and historically this was the best quarter. This was mainly the consequence of Brzeszcze coal mine, which extracted more than 400,000 tons of hard coal, which, to give you a better perspective, at that number corresponds to 10,000 rail coaches. So it's a record-breaking performance. In terms of electricity generation, it was lower, 8%. As I mentioned before, this is due to the commercial strategy we adopted for 2016. For us, the most important thing is in this respect an almost 3% increase of volume of distributed electricity. In terms of retail electricity supply, we posted a 7% drop. This is a drop that was lower than in previous quarters. We do believe that this means the reversing of a negative trend in this respect in the subsequent quarters of 2016. The situation will be improving. Ladies and gentlemen, the company has been communicating on an ongoing basis the key events, the key highlights during the 2016, but let me recap myself three main highlights that seem to be the most important from the group's point of view. First of all, it was the already mentioned issue of issuing of hybrid bonds. Tauron was a pioneer here, a trailblazer here, taking part in the Juncker plan. I think this was a great day for the company. The second important highlight is definitely the signature of agreement with Rafako. The signature of this agreement allowed us to intensify the work on the construction of a Jaworzno 910 megawatt power generation unit at this power plant. So it's a flagship project for our group. And the third important highlight that from your point of view has a certain importance, has a certain weight, is the upgrading by Fitch of the outlook from negative to stable. So much as far as the introduction is concerned. Let me hand over to Mr. Marek Wadowski, CFO. The macroeconomic situation in 2016 for the capital group, Tauron, for various reasons was beneficial, was favorable. We were dealing with quite a decent GDP growth rate, also a decent industrial output sold. The consumption of electricity in 2016 went up versus 2015 by 2%. The electricity production went up 0.5%. So the difference must have come from the import, especially from the Scandinavian countries. However, today we are already seeing that this trend has been reversed due to the problems in France with nuclear power generation. We seem to be exporting now more than importing. With respect to the electricity prices, the market shows us that the prices are rather stable. In 2016. At the end, we observed the pressure of increasing coal prices, but we do not see that yet on the electricity market. We are expecting the pressure, the coal price increases pressure could be reflected in 2018. With respect to the structure of electricity generation, in 2016, in Poland, the trend was continued to increase the output from renewable energy sources, which is very important for us. In total, along with the systematic drop of electricity generation from the conventional sources, I mean here the hard coal and lignite. The key financial data for 2016, full-year data, net profit that the TAURON Capital Group generated in 2016 was almost 370 million PLN. Let us remember that both in 2015 as well as in 2016, the net profit was substantially affected by the impairment charges, to a lesser degree in 2016, of course. However, due to the worsening prospects for the renewable energy sources segment, we decided to book write-downs in 2016 as well, due to the impairment charges. Of course, the EBITDA, when a certain one-off event took place, I mean, first of all, the provisions being set up, as well as a very important issue related to the CO2 emission allowances, namely in 2016, practically the entire pool of carbon credits we had to purchase, the free of charge. So if you include those provisions and the CO2, the EBITDA result would have been very close to the previous year. In Q4, looking at the EBITDA result, having taken out the elements related to the factors related to the provisions and the CO2 emission allowances cost, the EBITDA would have been even higher. The main reason for the fact that in Q4 the EBITDA, comparable EBITDA was higher in 2016 than in 2015 is the improvement of the mining segment. 100 million PLN versus the loss of almost 3 billion PLN. Of course, it's a big improvement, but as I mentioned, the main weighing factor that had an impact upon the increase of net profit were the impairment charges. The key segments results, full year 2016 results, show us that the contribution of the distribution segment in the EBITDA is systematically very high, continues to be very high. Here, 72% in 2016. Let me also draw your attention to the fact that within the generation segment, we have the TAURON Heat subsidiary, which is also a company that is to a large degree regulated, because TAURON Heat company has its tariffs approved by the regulator. So one may say that this is the company with similar characteristics, with one reservation, of course, namely the strong impact of weather, the climatic condition on the results of the TAURON Heat subsidiary. But this is the company with quite stable earnings and quite situation strongly dependent upon the regulations. So not only distribution is a regulated segment within our group, also the heat. The results of individual segments also show that, as you will see, the split of capex, invariably the main beneficiary of our capex spending is the distribution segment. The generation segment is also an important, first of all, the 910 megawatt unit at Jaworzno. In Q4, you can see clearly that even 78% of EBITDA was generated by the distribution segment, and the situation in terms of key values, key parameters here, generally speaking, has not changed. In the generation segment, the loss at the EBIT level is related, first of all, due to the impairment charges on the assets. EBITDA in 2016 full year, EBITDA very similar as in 2015. The biggest contribution on the EBITDA coming from the generation and the supply segments. I will give you the details in the moment. The mining segment is also important. This change of EBITDA is relatively small, less than 100 million PLN, but let us remember in 2015, the mining segment also had a difficult, very challenging situation. So this situation even worsened, but didn't have a major impact upon EBITDA. However, we are expecting that for 2017, the situation will be much better. In Q4, EBITDA was higher, 30%. The two segments that had a major impact upon Q4 EBITDA was the supply segment and the distribution segment. I will give you more details in a minute. These are the main factors mainly related to the provisions. Let's move on to the mining segment now. In 2016, the EBITDA generated by the segment was minus 72 million PLN. Of course, this is a negative result. However, it is worth noting that the situation of the segment has definitely improved in the second half of last year, especially in Q4. The main factor impacting this improvement was primarily the improvement of performance of namely the extraction output. Due to the fact that the second half of last year was definitely better and Q4 was a record-breaking quarter, it was possible to make up for the large portion of the losses that this segment generated in the first half of 2016. Of course, in the entire 2016, we were dealing with the unfavorable situation from our point of view, of course. I'm talking about the mining segment, because from the point of view of the generation segment, the situation is a bit different. But from the point of view of the mining segment, we are dealing with a situation where the prices of thermal coal dust was relatively low, and this was very important for this segment. However, if you look at that, the fact that this segment is in fact mainly the fixed cost business, the most important is the volume of extraction. Of course, the price is important as well. However, the effects that you can generate relatively quickly, of course, if it's possible to increase the extraction volume, and the effect that you can generate in the form of quite a substantial improvement of the earnings, mainly the main factor being the extraction volume. Now we are dealing in the segment of the following situation, that the extraction volume in Q1 is slightly lower than in Q4, but this is the result of scheduled, one may say, changes to the coal phases operation. So in fact, switching from one coal phase to another coal phase of mining machinery. In Q4, the earnings of this quarter was positive, 55 million PLN of EBITDA. One is also, it is worth also mentioning that the Brzeszczek generated a positive result. We are very happy to see that, but you can see there are such opportunities on the market, because it's worth stressing here that Brzeszcze is a coal mine which in certain conditions is a profitable business, profitable mine. The main pain of this coal mine was the level of extraction volume. In 2017, definitely this will be the segment where there will be a lot of challenges that we will be facing. However, we are hoping that the favorable situation in terms of extraction volume will be possible to be maintained. If we look at the daily commercial coal extraction, we can see that Q4 was the best quarter looking from the beginning, comparing to the other quarters starting from the beginning of 2015. So this is the main reason why the segment had such a strong improvement of its earnings. The generation segment, the two factors contributed to the level of EBITDA in this segment. First of all, the cost of CO2 emission allowances. The cost of CO2 emission allowances definitely went up in this segment 2016 versus the previous year. The main reason being, of course, the lack of the free of charge carbon credits. Starting from 2016, we may say that practically the entire pool we have to purchase. Practically, I'm saying, because there is a small amount of free of charge CO2 emission allowances, but it is not really relevant anymore. And we must take into account the fact that this segment, basically the entire capital group Tauron, due to the need to buy the entire pool of CO2 emission allowances, apart from the fact that for this reason we are incurring higher costs, we are also incurring a higher risk. Namely, the risk has appeared, quite important risk, of an increase of the CO2 emission allowances prices, and of course a foreign exchange risk, because the carbon credits are expressed in euro. Property rights had also a major impact, namely the decreasing prices of property rights in this segment. Green energy generation suffered a lot in 2016. We have the Eco Energia company that generates electricity from wind and hydro. This company is experiencing a painful situation in this due to what's happening on the market. The price is definitely lower. Today it's about 32 PLN. This is a very, very low level. However, also the issue appears of electricity generation from biomass. I skip here the issue of correction coefficient, but important element in case of Tauron Capital Group, which was the reason for us setting up provisions in 2016, was the profitability analysis, whether it's worth for us to generate electricity from biomass using the units for which we received subsidies, or is it more profitable for us to suffer the risk of having to give back the subsidy? And we can see this risk going up because due to the fact that the relationship between the prices of green certificates and the biomass prices is unfavorable. Simply this production is not profitable anymore. In 2016, we're dealing definitely with a higher revenue from the operational capacity reserve and from the cold intervention reserve, which was launched starting from the beginning of 2016. In 2017, we are expecting much lower revenue because of a high level of contracts, high volume of contracts. In Q4 alone, if you look at Q4 alone, the Genesis segment situation and factors affecting it were very similar, so CO2 costs and the cost of property rights. Distribution segment. Distribution is our most important segment. Quite often, Tauron is being perceived as a mining and generation company, but let me highlight that our largest subsidiary is Tauron Distribution, and the Tauron Distribution, this subsidiary has the biggest impact upon our earnings, and the regulations in this segment have the biggest impact upon our earnings. In 2016, the weighted average cost of capital went down, which automatically had an impact upon our tariff, so our lower EBITDA, in fact. EBITDA in 2016, we also dissolved the actuarial provision. This is the result of discussions with the social party in the distribution segment. This is out of the agreements reached related to the collective bargaining agreement, company's collective bargaining agreement, and this is the result also of our hard work, because those talks were not easy, of course, and we are definitely thankful to the social side for approaching in a mature way our negotiations. This also shows that in terms of a relationship with the workforce, we try to maintain the relationship at the best possible level. This dissolving of this provision is a one-off event. However, it is an event that will have its implications in terms of reducing the cost year on year in this segment. Of course, it's not a large scale because it's a provision that discounts the future cash flow due to the spending that will not take place anymore. In Q4 distribution, also we can see clearly that in this segment the biggest impact came from the dissolving of the actuarial provision. The other factors had less important. In this segment, we are dealing with emphasizing that the volume of electricity distributed is going up. It's 1% in 2016. In Q4 2016 is 3% looking quarter over quarter, but what's important is the structure of this growth, because the area where TAURON distribution is operating is the area that is highly urbanized area, also highly industrial area. On our territory, we have a large portion of hard coal mining facilities, coal mines, and a large industrial area. In this segment, due to the problems in the mining segment, we can see a decline of electricity distributed volume, but we have a strong growth in the SME segment. It's more than 4% growth year over year. This is quite important for this segment. Continuously, maybe to a small degree, but still continuously, the amount of electricity distributed in the household segments is going down. The supply segment year over year, full year results, you can see the impact of provision on the Stalowa CHP. This provision, one may say, distorts the earnings of this segment, but looking at the things that are not one-offs, but were important in 2016, first of all, the decline of the volume of electricity supplied. As the CEO mentioned before, 2017 is the year where we are expecting this trend to reverse as far as the decline of the supply is concerned. What's important is the property rights. Here, the property rights in this segment worked in a positive manner. However, there's some shift here, because the decline of prices of property rights is reflected in the electricity prices sold by TAURON supply, but with a delay. In Q4 alone, the biggest impact came from the one-off, such as the provision for the Stalowa CHP. Important elements are also the same as in the full year earnings, the volume of electricity, but the decline of this volume looking quarter over quarter is smaller, and the prices of property rights as well. Debt and financing. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, it's worth emphasizing that TAURON at the end of 2016 has the ability, in line with the agreement signed, to draw debt up to the amount of almost 4 billion PLN, above what it already has on its books. Of course, we are limited by way of covenants, net debt to EBITDA ratio, and this covenant we are trying to take care of as much as possible to feel comfortable with the level of this net debt to EBITDA ratio covenant, and also in order to implement our strategy. Let me remind you that in the strategy that the management board approved in September 2016, we assumed as a foundation for our growth the company's financial stability, and now we are steadfastly implementing this strategy in practice. And an important part of that is making sure that the level of net debt to EBITDA ratio is controlled, is under control. It's also important what's the distribution of the maturity of individual bond issues. 2019, 2020, these are the difficult years. We are working now on these maturity debts to be spread more uniformly. Especially, we are interested in extending the maturity, the debt maturity, due to the fact that we are dealing with, for instance, if we talk about the construction of the Jaworzno generation unit, we have to remember about the fact that this unit is being built over a certain period of time, and the return that we will get from this investment project will be spread over time. Therefore, we want to align to a better degree. Of course, it's never possible to do it ideally, but to align it better to the effect that we'll be generating from our investment projects. And here, a thing that I'd like to draw attention to is the issue of subordinated debt that we carried out at the end of 2016. These subordinated bonds, of course, are long-term. Of course, it's a debt that needs to be repaid, but the fact is that the repayment comes after 18 years, so it's a debt with a very long maturity date. However, they have the features of both debt and equity, because it's worth remembering here that it is a debt that is being repaid as a second priority. So one may say that if, God forbid, some situation happened where one would have to repay the entire debt, first the senior debt would have to be repaid, so the large bond issue or the smaller bond issue, and as a second priority, the subordinated bonds. They have a certain characteristic feature that allows us, allows the rating agency, and our rating agency is Fitch, this feature allows the rating agency to classify 50% of its debt as debt and 50% as equity. Of course, from a booking point of view, it's 100% equity because according to the international financial reporting standards, you cannot book it any other way. But the subordinated debt, in accordance with the agreements that we have for bond issues, is not taken into account when calculating the net debt to EBITDA ratio. Therefore, the outcome of such an activity, the issue of subordinated debt, is the reduction of the net debt to EBITDA ratio. Of course, the net debt to EBITDA ratio taken into account when issuing bonds or when the banks check whether we compliant with the requirements of the covenants. But if someone calculates this debt that they have on the balance sheet to EBITDA, then this leverage ratio will come out to be higher. I think I will finish my part here. I think I'd like to hand over to the CEO to talk about the CapEx. Ladies and gentlemen, a few words about the work progress on key projects. So, let me put it this way. The most important project is the Jaworzno 910 megawatt unit. End of 2016, we may speak about a 30% work progress level there. And I think we can quite safely state that this investment project will be completed by November 2019. The second very important project that is being carried out is, of course, the CCGT unit at Stalowa Wola. Here, the work progress is 85%. As you definitely are aware, this investment project was inventoried. This inventory taking works have been completed, and jointly with Polish oil and gas company PGNiG, we will continue this investment project. The completion date we expect to take place in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, let me draw your attention to the investment projects in the mining segment. Namely, we have completed the full integration of Brzeszcze Coal Mine into the Tauron Mining subsidiary and thus the Tauron Capital Group, which of course allows us to carry out the investments in this investment project in this area, in this segment. And first of all, it will be the construction of an 800-meter level at Janina Coal Mine, construction of Grzegorz Shaft at Sobiecki Coal Mine, and the entire CapEx program at Brzeszcze Coal Mine. If we look at the CapEx in 2016, the total was 4.8 billion PLN, and traditionally there were mainly spent in two segments. Distribution, 1.8 billion PLN, mainly CapEx aimed at upgrading grid infrastructure and construction of new connections. One should remind oneself here that distribution generates 70% of the group's EBITDA, whereas the second segment was generation. Almost 1.7 billion PLN was spent in CapEx in this segment, and the most of the spending went directly into the Jaworzno project. What we would like to draw attention to is the efficiency improvement program as part of the Tauron Group's strategy adopted in September 2016. Currently, the company is implementing its third successive efficiency improvement program. We assume that this program will generate a total result in 2016-2018 time frame in the region of 1,300,000,000 PLN. As of now, end of 2016, namely, we already generated 487 million PLN, which represents 37% of the total planned value of savings to be achieved as part of the efficiency improvement program. The highest savings were realized in the distribution and generation segments. I'll be frank with you, but the good results of the efficiency improvement program make us very happy and allow us to have a certain dose of optimism looking into the future. That's all from me. I'd like to ask the CFO to do his summary. Ladies and gentlemen, prospects for 2017, as we see the prospects looking at our environment and what is happening in the capital group itself, the distribution, in our opinion, we have a stable outlook in this segment. For 2017, first of all, we assume that in 2017 the regulatory asset base will go up by 707 million PLN, up to 16.1 billion PLN. We assume an increase of the volume of electricity to be delivered, because we can see clearly that this is a trend that will be continued also in 2017. Increased average distribution service rate we expect to take place. It's not necessarily due to the weighted average cost of capital, but there are other factors that have contributed to a small but still an increase of the average distribution service rate. Weighted average cost of capital at the 2016 level, it has changed, but it was a minimum change. The effects of that are insignificant. And we are continuing the efficiency improvement program. That is, for us, as the CEO mentioned, is a very important element. Of course, it's not easy, because a large portion of the efficiency improvement program is related to the negotiations with the social side, with the workforce. But we think it's so important that we should focus on it very strongly. In 2017, it will be another year where we'll be working on it. In the supply segment also, we see stable outlook, rising volume of supply to end users, retail end users versus 2016. Of course, if we compare it to the previous years, here this volume could be lower, but we are happy to see that in 2017 we can speak about stop arresting and breaking through, reversing the negative declining trend. Lower prices, aggressive competition. Here, ladies and gentlemen, we can see clearly that still there is a competitive pressure and competition for customers. Of course, we are struggling with that. We are standing up to those challenges, and we hope that this competition will be continued in 2017. Therefore, achieving good earnings by the supply segment will be a challenge, but definitely here we are ready to rise to this challenge. We have ideas how to approach it in 2017. In the generation segment, the pressure from rising coal prices, we can see now that this pressure is already there. We don't see yet this pressure translated into higher electricity prices. So therefore, this segment, the outlook we see is declining, because the number of negative factors in this segment 2017 is quite important. Lower CO2 emission allowances, purchase prices, of course, they are important, but we must remember that by the entire pool now. Therefore, if we compare it to the previous years, then definitely this increase of cost, despite the fact that these prices of CO2 emission allowance prices are lower, so we are observing rising costs. Electricity and green certificates sales prices, still the market in terms of prices, I mean here, first of all, the wholesale market is not showing any harbingers of growth. We don't see any factors that may lead to a strong growth. Of course, we are hoping this pressure from rising coal prices in 2018 will lead to some change on the electricity market, the prices, electricity prices, but for now this is more of our dreams and wishful thinking. In the mining segment, we can see a growth outlook. Definitely the coal production volume is an important factor. We assume that in 2017 we will achieve the ultimate extraction output at Brzeszcze coal mine, and the positive element in the segment is the rising coal sales prices. As I mentioned before, the factor that has definitely helped more is the increase of production volume. That's what we are focusing on, and we are focusing on the production to be carried down in line with the plan, as scheduled, as budgeted. We concentrate on improving the efficiency in this segment. Definitely, this is the segment that brings a lot of challenges because the geological and mining conditions are always the conditions that might bring us a negative surprise. Effective cost management of preparatory works, cost management, one thing, but on the side of preparatory works and the service providers and suppliers of mining machines and devices, we can see some pressure to increase prices, and we are afraid that in terms of cost levels, it may turn out that the increase of prices will have a negative impact on the rise of our costs. And however, as of today, we are focusing on improving efficiency. However, this negative factor in this segment is possible. CapEx and debt. We assume the CapEx of more than 4 billion PLN. Of course, it is related mainly to the investment projects in the distribution segment, but also the investment in the generation segment. So, namely, the construction of Jaworzno generation unit. Growing debt level, also we assume it will take place, but the net debt to EBITDA ratio of 3.5 will not be breached. That's all from us. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now I'd like to invite you to ask questions, both persons sitting here in the room, but as well as persons following our web broadcast. Please ask questions using the form available on the broadcast website. Please go ahead. Good afternoon, Paweł Puchalski, BZWBK. I have a question about the supply segment, because you are expecting a stable EBITDA year over year. At the same time, you're saying, you're complaining about the fact that you have lost some customers and you need to recover them, and it's never cheap. You're always talking about the high competitive pressures on margins. So by what miracle, fighting for increasing volumes and competing for customers on a competitive market, you are able to achieve a flat EBITDA, a stable EBITDA in the supply segment? Let me assure you, these are not miracles. However, here it is. First of all, we are assuming the following, ladies and gentlemen, that in 2017, we will be expanding something that we are calling the so-called customer loyalty program. We'll be expanding other services we want to provide to our customers, not just simple sale of electricity or gas, because we are expanding the gas sales as well. Of course, the sales volumes are not as high as electricity sales volumes, but I agree here that we may face some rising costs due to this fact, because expansion to other areas, not just electricity supply, involves increasing costs. We want to focus on the fact that we want to offer to the household segment services, or to spread more the services we are already providing, such as an electrician or service personnel, but also to include in the expansion of service offering, the segment, include the SME segment. These are two main factors in 2017 that we see materializing. Of course, on one hand, we see rising costs, but on the other hand, we are hoping to get an increased margin. These are the two main factors that mean to us that we perceive this segment as stable. However, we cannot exclude the fact that there may be a slight decline of EBITDA in this segment. But I mean here really slight, not a strong drop. The second question, if I may, your partner in the construction of one of the units, PGNiG, Polish Oil and Gas Company, 2 days ago showed us their projections for electricity prices, and I asked Tauron to comment the forecast of electricity prices of 150 PLN in 2022, because I suspect that they did it based on some assumptions, and I'm curious what would be Tauron's response to that. Because these are numbers taken from the official presentation of PGNiG. Yes, that's clear. I think the person that is able to answer the question best would be Mr. Dariusz Niemiec, Director Dariusz Niemiec. I would like to ask Dariusz Niemiec to comment on that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, electricity prices, wholesale electricity prices will be evolving in the future based on certain economic incentives, both internal happening in Poland and the external ones, and those forecasts vary. We think that 150 PLN in the time frame that you mentioned is a price that is too low. Our forecast is more optimistic in this respect, but we are frank here. First of all, the profitability on this generation unit, the CCGT unit, will be, first of all, stabilized by the capacity market payments, something that already exists in the Polish power system. I mean here the operational capacity reserve, which is continuously improved and stimulated, as well as the capacity market. And work on that has accelerated significantly. We can say that the recent information we are getting that the Ministry of Energy is consulting this with the European Commission. The law on the capacity market is also to go to the Council of Ministers soon in order to be sent to the Parliament afterwards. So we believe that we'll have early 2020s. We will have a dual product market in Poland, and the profitability of generation units covered by this new type of market will be definitely better. It'll definitely improve. Thank you. Please, more questions. Go ahead. Good afternoon, Piotr Dziorowski, Citibank. I'd like to ask about the earnings of the distribution segment. You're saying 16 billion regulatory asset base, 5.6% weighted average cost of capital. If I multiply one by the other, plus I add depreciation, I get 1.9 billion. This is a model EBITDA of the segment. If you could explain the difference of 500 million, why? Where does it come from? How big is this? Is the volume effect that you submit for approval, a forecast volume, actual volume is higher. How much money we make on that? However, 16 billion times 5.6% plus 1 billion of depreciation is not 2.4 but 1.9 billion. Okay, let's do it this way. In the distribution segment, we have a tariff approved for 2017. What we are talking about with respect to the increase of regulatory asset base is the element will have a positive impact upon the earnings. However, we are assuming something like that on one hand, the tariff will have a positive, but a small but positive impact. However, there are also elements that will lead to the rising costs. I mean here, the costs, of course, passed on in the tariff, covered by the regulator, but the impact of the tariff in 2017 on the earnings is is symbolic, a symbolic increase. If 700 million is multiplied, because the increase of RAB is 700 million times 5%, it'll be about 35 million. No, that's not my question, because I don't want to do an exercise year over year, but I want to do it in a bottom-up way. So RAB times WACC plus depreciation is 1.9 billion. Historically, Tauron had a very high OPEX gap, which was 300 million during the IPO, and wasn't eliminated in the meantime. So the whole was about 600, 700 million. So the regulator closes its eyes, seeing that you have lower grid losses, so you get 2% of grid losses in the tariff. That is your result. And this is the volume effect, because you have the approved volume, which is the actual performance is a bit higher. And again, I'd like to understand where the 600, 700 million PLN comes. Is the risk that we'll keep closing our eyes, and you are definitely breaking the covenant. So the entire Tauron is based on distribution. You're not fully explaining the 600, 700 million that I cannot understand. Because I remember lighting in the streets being put on. You can make several million on that, but not 700. Let me put it this way: as you know very well, we are of course dealing with something like that, but it's never so that what we earn in the given year is an exact reflection of the tariff. There are certain differences, differences in grid losses, differences due to the volume of electricity that was adopted for designing the tariff. Therefore, there are certain elements outside the tariff itself that impact the earnings of the distribution segment. As of today, we do not see any big differences because of that. However, let me put it this way: that is 16 billion is multiplied by 6%, then the difference is not that big. But if we may look at 2017, maybe in more detail, but I don't see the difference to be as much as 700 million versus what we show. But anyhow, the main factor here that has an impact upon the distribution's earnings is a slight increase of the tariff. The other factors do not have such, are not that important. I can show you afterwards how we calculate that, but I don't see such big differences here. Let me ask a second question, please. I'd like to ask about the hybrid financing. Is it possible to increase this type of financing and modify the calculation of this leverage ratio even more in the future? So maybe so we get the entire financing from hybrid financing, but we can get 3 where we'll have 12 instead of 10 of debt. You understand? If it's such a good tool, then what's the capacity of this tool, and how much you're paying for this tool? Because someone must accept some conditions to lend money for 18 years to Tauron, so must be optimistic about the future. The hybrid financing, if we look at the utilities, power utilities that are operating in the western part of the European Union, so such a safe level is considered to be 20% of the total debt. And we also assume that it shouldn't have a bigger share of that. Of course, one can keep on increasing it infinitely, but on the other hand, if we have this covenant of 3.5 leverage ratio, so the hybrid financing is kind of financing that somehow improves the situation. However, you cannot do it into infinity because the risk is growing, and the willingness of the financial institutions to extend this type of financing is getting lower and lower. So I assume this up to 20% of the total debt. The cost of such financing on the market is 6-8%. It is less than the cost of equity. However, the cost that Tauron is incurring in the financing carried out jointly with the European Investment Bank is a cost that is much lower. However, as part of under the conditions of our agreement with the bank, I can't give you exact code, but it's lower than 6-8% that I mentioned. But this is on a purposeful, for a specific purpose, investment project. If this investment project is completed, these are projects in the distribution segment, then once they are completed, we can get a discount on this cost versus this cost. This last question, yesterday Enea showed that they want to upgrade its Połaniec 200 megawatt unit to complete this investment project, because it's an excellent investment project to do this investment project into the 200 megawatt unit. Do you think this is right? Because Director Niemiec was explaining that these units are not profitable, and you officially asked the TSO not to upgrade these units to 200 megawatts. That these investments did not make sense. What's your opinion now about these 200 megawatt units upgrades? Please. Ladies and gentlemen, the scenario continues to be the same. If this economic environment would not allow us to get the return on the capital invested in the upgrading of the 200 megawatt units, these assets must be restructured. We have two scenarios open. We continue to hope that the dual product energy product market will be interested in Poland, but will allocate funds to exactly the capacity that Poland needs. I'm not saying how much capacity will be needed, but exactly the capacity that will be required to upgrade the Polish power system to comply with BATs. And these funds must be generated by this type of regulations or by the prices. As we know, the permanent feature of the energy market is 18% surplus. Surplus on every market brings the price down to the incremental costs. So the problem in the power market is always there, but the surplus must be there, but no one wants to pay for it. Therefore, that's why the TSO, along with the Energy Regulatory Office, first introduced these two system services, the called intervention reserves, intervention capacity reserve. But now the government plans to introduce the capacity market as a permanent segment for the time required to upgrade and maintain the necessary capacity in the Polish power system. So Tauron continues to have these two scenarios. If there are good economic conditions, we will definitely be upgrading those units. If not, we will have to restructure these assets. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Mr. Paweł Puchalski again, please. I have the question about the mining segment. I'm looking at slide 14 and the numbers, then the bar graph. At Brzeszcze, volume went up significantly, Q4 over Q3, which indicates that we should have a significant increase in EBITDA because you have fixed costs. You mentioned it yourself. Whereas I'm looking at the contribution of the Brzeszcze coal mine to EBITDA, and in Q3 it was 10, in Q4 is 6. So my question is whether there were some one-off costs that will not happen again, or maybe the costs in Q4 reached this actual proper level. And the next question related to the previous one, you mentioned that Q1 will be relatively weaker in the mining segment. And my question is, does it mean that Brzeszcze in Q1 of 2017 will report the loss at the EBITDA level? But I'm not sure what's the right level of EBITDA, but I should have a starting point. Okay, let's start with the following. EBITDA in Q4, earlier it was 10, in Q4 we have +6 versus 2015. So this EBITDA level in Q4 is definitely not the ultimate level, because in Brzeszcze, at Brzeszcze coal mine itself, on one hand we have to look at the extraction volume, which is a bit weaker in Q1, but planned a bit weaker, a bit lower, but we expect some of the costs that were not incurred in Q4 2016 may be shifted to 2017. These are some, a portion of course. These are not large numbers, but it may be applicable to some of the costs. Whereas Q1 alone of 2017, we are not expecting Brzeszcze to generate a loss. We are not expecting that. We will see what will be the ultimate extraction out volume. However, we see this level to allows us to think that this result could be positive. Thank you. Since I don't see any more persons willing to ask a question, our speakers will be available after the conference to you. Please, we'd like to thank you for the invitation to today's meeting. And today I have already the pleasure to invite you to the meeting when we'll be presenting earnings for Q1 2017, 11th of May. And in your daily operations, please contact the investor relations team. Thank you very much and see you in May. Thank you.